everyone, and welcome to The Shallow End. My name is Dave Schwartz, Iowa Dave Sports Cards on Instagram, and we are flying blind today, and let me explain. My computer is having some issues, so no problem. I figured I would just bring my mic to work and use my work computer, except my work computer was not here. When I got here, ITS had grabbed it because they are running some updates and maybe an upgrade, which would be great. So I am speaking to you through an old iPad, which doesn't connect to the mic, which might be why it doesn't sound as crisp as usual, but whatever. We power through these sorts of things. So welcome. And today I'm going to recap The Chase, which was a recent limited series that ran on this podcast feed in 15 parts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide one takeaway from each of the 15 people I had the privilege to speak with. Let me give you just a little bit of background first about how this all came together, because maybe that might be a little bit interesting. So last year in November, I ran a 27-part series called 27 Decisions. And when I put that together, I would, on Instagram stories, I would say, hey, I'm working on this thing. If anybody wants to contribute, if anybody has any ideas, reach out. And I did that maybe 4 or 5 times. And over the course of those 4 or 5 stories, I finally got 27 or 28 people who responded. And that then became the 27 Decisions series. For the next one, I knew that I wanted to focus on the chase. So whereas the decision one was about choices that people make in their collections to go one way or the other, what I found really interesting is how people then pursue the cards that they want, whether that's a specific single card or a player run or a set. So I thought, let's do something called The Chase. And so once again, I think it was around January or early February. I think it was January. I put out a story on Instagram that just said, hey, I'm working on this. If you would like to take part, let me know. Tell me what your story is. And right away, instantly, I got about 18 to 20 different responses. Now remember, it took 4 or 5 posts to get 27 responses on the first one. And here, on try number 1, I'm already around 18 to 20. And so I just stopped. I thought, with the increased response rate, if I put this up again a second time or a third time, this is going to become a project that is just so massive that I can't possibly finish it in any realistic time frame. So I said, that was enough. That was good. I'll stop there. And I reached out to the 18 or so people who said they were interested. And of those 18, 15 ended up working out for what became The Chase. And so it became this 2-ish week series in which there were interviews ranging from about 15 minutes up to about 25 or 30 minutes, in which we talk specifically, hyper-focused on the chase that this collector undertook to complete or to round out parts of their collections. The one catch, the one thing that I knew I wanted to do here was not have it be works in progress. I didn't want it to be people who are chasing things and then we spend 25 minutes saying, oh, I've looked here but no luck, and I've looked here but no luck, and hey, if anybody has found it, maybe reach out. I wanted to have successful chases because I wanted there to be this ending at the end that provides some modicum of hope or understanding about how these things work. And so over the course of a few weeks, I was lucky enough to be able to have these 15 different conversations with 15 collectors. And I really wanted it to be diverse. And what I mean by diverse is I didn't want it to be just vintage or just modern or just 1980s cards or just ultra modern or just people who collect high-end cards or people who collect low-end cards. I wanted there to be a mix of everything. And so if you have listened to this so far, or if you are planning on listening to it, I hope that one thing that you'll notice is hopefully there is a little bit of something for everyone. There is vintage, there is ultra modern, there are cheap cards, there are expensive cards, there were chases that took years and years and years and over more than a decade. And there are chases that took 2 or 3 years. And I think by bringing this all together, what we can see is that we are all in the same boat. We're all on the same journey. We're not all seeking the same thing, but we all have the same general types of experiences where we've looked for this card, we can't find it. Maybe eventually we do find it, but it takes longer than we want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to recap, because we can go through these things so quickly. Things are so easily and quickly forgotten in not just the hobby, but in everything, right? Life moves really fast, and what might seem like a really incredible moment, like a wonderful birthday party, or somebody does a really nice thing for you. A week later, we've already moved on to something else. A day later, we've moved on. So before I move on to other things that I'm excited to talk about here in the coming weeks on the Shallow End, I just want to pump the brakes a little bit and recap 15 moments from these 15 conversations of the chase. And they all still live on the podcast feed. So if you have not heard them yet, if you've only heard a few, go back and find the ones that you want to listen to if you have the time, and spend a few minutes with it. And I really appreciate you doing that. And I'd love to hear from you. I've heard from a lot of you, and my favorite question to ask people when they're kind enough to reach out and say that they've enjoyed the series is I ask them, which one of these really resonated with you the most and why? And there's just so many different reasons. A couple of them I will touch on here as I read through these notes I've made. So as I go through these 15, I'm going to read them off in the order that they were published. So there's no, my favorite is this one, or my second favorite is this one, or favoritism or anything. I'm just reading it 1 through 15 in order of how they came out originally. So let's start with the very first one, which was Robbie. And Robbie goes by 412 Sports Cards on Instagram. And he was collecting a Marc-Andre Fleury hockey card. And what I remember most about this one, when I think back to this conversation, is I think about this idea of being persistent when you find out who has the card that you want, but without being a jerk. Nobody owes us a card. We don't deserve to have any card. No card belongs to us unless we actually own that card. And so Robbie found his card. And over the course of many months, would check back in with the collector very politely. He would just say, hey, just letting you know I'm still interested. And then finally, when the previous owner of the card was finally ready to sell, it was a no-brainer. It was going to Robbie, because he didn't pester him. He didn't reach out daily or even weekly. It was just every month or every, 4, 6, 8 weeks or however long it was. He'd say, hey, just checking in, letting you know I'm still interested. Thanks. Hope you're enjoying the card. And that was it. And then when the seller finally had to move on, it went right to Robbie. And it's not just for selfish reasons that we do that. It's not just because, I'm going to get the card that I want. Just try being a decent human being. And that's what Robbie was being. Which leads me into the second one, and that was Luke from Bleecker Street Cards. And he had the Satchel Paige Auto. Just an incredible, incredible card. Luke kind of stumbled into a potential gold mine when he had somebody whose relative had a bunch of Hall of Fame cards, vintage cards, signed cards, reach out to him to ask for help and guidance because they didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't the person who collected these, it was the person's brother. And we've all heard these stories, right, in the hobby about I found this great deal. Someone didn't know what they had, and I got this cards. And Luke potentially could have done that, but instead he became a sort of guide or a mentor to this person who had inherited the set. And in these sets, or in this, not set, but in this collection, And in this collection, there were a couple, three cards that Luke just looked at and goes, oh man, I would love to have these as part of my collection someday. But he knew that the right thing to do was to help these people. And then when the moment was right, he mentioned that there was one card he really would like to have, to buy, not just to have, but to buy and to make part of his collection. And then eventually, once the trust was earned and the person that he was working with thought that, yeah, this is somebody I feel comfortable giving the card to. Luke had earned his trust, but more importantly, Luke had really helped this family out. Right? Who knows what they would have done with those cards if they had gone somewhere else, if they had found the wrong person. But instead, they found Luke, and their family is better off for it financially. They're better off for it socially because they learned, even late in life, that, hey, people can still be trusted. And Luke did get one of the cards that he won. He got at the Satchel Paige Auto, but more than that is there's self-respect, and there's just like with Robbie and that Marc-Andre Fleury, just be a decent human. Just we hear a lot of bad stories in this hobby, but one thing that I'm really grateful for with the Chase is that we learned that there are good people in this hobby, many good people in this hobby who are just here to help and to be kind and to be thoughtful. Up number 3 was Caleb. On Instagram, he is Caleb M 2034. And what I learned from Caleb, and he collected a Justin Upton triple threads, a really hard card to find, more than a decade old, of a really good player, but not a superstar Hall of Famer. And those can be some of the hardest cards to find. If this had been an Albert Pujols or an Ichiro or a Mike Trout card, every 6 months or so this card might pop up. But someone like Justin Upton, really good player. And if you played fantasy back then, he's a guy that you would want to have on your team, but he's not the kind of card that people stashed away. But I learned that collecting can be really frustrating. But that makes all the more rewarding and exciting if you stay the course for when that card finally appears and rewards you for your devotion and your patience to it. As that story was unfolding and Caleb was talking about, he wasn't even sure that card existed. He was pretty sure that it did, right? I mean, he was on the checklist and everything else, but he just couldn't find it along with other cards from that set. And then one day, there it was. And just the way the relief and the excitement washed over him, you could really hear that in how he told his story. And I, at least personally, have a tendency to be impatient, where I jump from thing to thing sometimes in this hobby and don't stick with things as long as I should. What Caleb did was a testament to having that patience. And he was collecting other things at the same time. But when that card finally showed, there was a validation that he felt and should have felt that I think can inspire us to keep waiting when maybe we just don't feel like waiting any longer. The 4th episode was with Sheik, who was at the Iron Sheik. And man, he had waited years to find his LeBron James auto. It was out of 25, but he hadn't seen more than a small handful. But what I pulled away from this one wasn't what we talked about early in the episode. It was what we talked about at the end, when he started talking about the wonder of collecting and how it's still there for him, and when he sees younger collectors out there and what they're excited about, and how he tries to impart that knowledge down and to do it the right way, that you can still pay it forward. That's what I'll think of when I think of my conversation with Sheik. He is one of the more interesting figures in the hobby. He's so knowledgeable. He's plugged in. He works for one of the auction houses, for one of the marketplaces. And I just learned so much, but to hear how he still has hope for the younger generations and how we can impart that on to them and to help them learn to collect the right way, to do their research, to study, to really learn about the cards they're collecting. I think he's spot on with that. Number 5 is Timothy. He goes by Monster Collects. That's collects with 2 S's on the end. And he was, if you heard this one, you'll remember it. He was the one that has just an insane amount of willpower. For about 3.5 years, he was looking for a PSA 10 2014 Mookie Betts update base rookie. The pop on this is nearly 5,000. And at any moment, there are so many of these cards that are on eBay. And for 3.5 years, he didn't buy one off eBay because he wanted to get one in person at a show or an LCS. But whenever he went to a show or an LCS, he never found one. And yet he never gave in. He just never gave in. There were other cards that he was collecting. He's a Colton Wong collector, and he likes Mookie Betts, of course. But this one card, he wanted to see it in person, and then he finally got it at the Nashville Card Show. After he was there for 4 or 5 hours on his way out, there was this booth, was right near the exit or the entrance, and there it was, and he finally found it. And I was thinking about Tim lately because I was thinking about my own plan for the National this year. And the last 2 years at the National, I've gone in with these really intricate ideas of what I want to do, and I've accomplished it both years. But this year, there are maybe 8 to 10 vintage cards that I would like to add to my collection, but I like to see my vintage cards in person. So while any of the vintage cards that I would like to add to my PC, they're all available on eBay, if I ever get tempted to think, well, maybe this one looks pretty good, maybe I'll just grab this one. I think about Timothy waiting 3.5 years for a common card in a high grade, and I don't need a high grade for the vintage cards that I want, but I do want the satisfaction and the comfort that comes with being able to see it in person. And so that's something that I'm going to carry forward, is that, if there's a way that you want to do something and you think that's the right way to do it, hold off. Willpower, patience, inner strength. Timothy, I am inspired by you. Next up, episode 6 was Joey. And Joey goes by @SackKingsCards on Instagram. From him, I learned the power of research. And he was collecting a Kevin Martin draft day basketball card. And what the moment I remember from this is when he was talking about, there was a moment when he wasn't even sure after a while if this card even existed. Because he had found it in checklists and he knew that in theory it existed, but even people like him who covered or who collected the Sacramento Kings team players, team cards, even they had never seen it. So 2 years into his search was the first time he even talked to somebody who even had one. And it took 2 years just for confirmation that this card was actually a real thing. But he put the time in with the research. He read online about it. He talked to other collectors about it. He put in the work. And then finally, another couple of years after that, he found one. So the research, I think, is half the fun. Number 7 is Aaron. And Aaron is @IrishSportsCards21. He was such a thoughtful, responsible collector. He collects Mo Vaughn, the old Boston Red Sox slugger. And, overextending yourself for a card, no matter how bad you want that card, diminishes the enjoyment and the fun you get out of that card. And Aaron understands that he has other priorities in his life, certainly, that for him to really enjoy collecting the Mo Vaughn cards that he wanted, he had to do it within his budget. So when he finally decided, you know what, it's time, I've been working my way up in smaller dollar amounts, and I think I finally want to make this move. He made sure that his house was in order, and then he made the leap. And then when he got the card, he could just enjoy the card. No stress over the dollar amount. Or, maybe a little bit, but nothing like as if he had bought it and then tried to figure out how to pay for it. I really admire that approach to collecting. Number 8 was Brandon, who is flagship Chrome collector. And right off the bat, I'll tell you that I received the most comments about any episode for this episode with Brandon. I never realized how hard and taxing set collecting can be. He made a comment that says, you will never get your money back in a set. Almost never. Because some of the most hard to find cards or of the most common players that should cost $1, but they're the hardest ones to find, so the prices go way up, and you're not going to get reimbursed on that if you decide to move it later. But for him to be collecting this pinnacle set from the 1990s and to have finished it over the period of, I think, 14 years with a break in between at one point, but to hear the amount of effort and thought that went into it, Brandon, who I didn't know at all before this project, became, for me, one of the most important people who I follow on Instagram. And he doesn't collect sets anymore. It was just too hard. He had to put too many resources into it. But this is a guy that really not just understands different parts of the hobby, but he understands how to explain the intricacies of different parts of the hobby. And so the comments just came flooding in to my DMs after this episode saying, wow, he was really good. Like, I learned so much, or what a great episode. Episode number 9 was Chris, who is Venezuelan League stickers. And I love the way Chris combined the best of both worlds. So Chris likes, and still does like, modern and ultra-modern cards. And the thing that he likes about them is just there are so many different parallels, and it's fun to chase down the rare ones. But he also loves vintage, especially Venezuelan cards from the 1960s. And the way that his love of rare cards and modern and ultra-modern bleeds into his appreciation for vintage is that, well, anybody can, for a lot of vintage cards, say like the 1950s and 60s, for a lot of those cards, they're plentiful, they're everywhere. But he likes the chase and he likes the rarity. And so he was able to infuse his vintage collecting with this idea of rarity by looking at the Venezuelan cards of the 1960s. And so he combined, it was this fantastic overlap of vintage, which Chris really enjoys, and the hunt of scarcity, which Venezuelan cards provide. Fantastic. I just loved his creativity. So that is number, 7, 8, 9. Up next is number 10. Number 10 is Ben, who is at Big Devers Energy. And this was the second most commented on episode. He was the one who collected 2014 gold foil going after the Xander Bogaerts. And this was a promotion, send away, giveaway, redemption thing that nobody knew about from the 2014 season. But he found one. He's a Red Sox fan, and he was finally, after years, able to track down a Xander Bogaerts as he was looking for. And what I learned from this is that there is always something new in this hobby to think about that we're not aware of, that is right under our noses. And the comments that I was getting on this were saying, I had no idea that this parallel even existed. This is crazy. Like, I collect somebody who's in this 2014 set, and I did not know this exists, and now I have something new to chase. So Ben took a set that's not that old, 2014 Topps, and flipped it on his head and gave us a brand new parallel to think about. Number 11 is Kevin, who is at Kevin M. Cormier on Instagram. And from Kevin, I was reminded that you've got to keep the hobby interesting. He got in-person autos for an entire KB Toys, which was a toy store from the 80s. They had a set of cards, I think of 33 cards, and he tracked down in-person autos on every one of those 33 KB Toys cards. And just some fun stories in there about him trying to chase down Frank Viola, the old Twins and Mets pitcher, and to pin him down and trying to get that last autograph, and Tony Fernandez and others. This was not a set that we've heard a lot about. As soon as he mentioned KB Toys, I was hurled backward in time to my childhood. And it was a different day and a different era, but my parents would want to go to the mall on a Friday night, and they would just let my sister and I roam around KB Toys for half an hour while they went off somewhere else, to the bookstore or who knows where. And it's such a fun set, and to see the pictures of what Kevin put together just really brought me back. But you got to keep it interesting. Got to do something new. Got to do something fun. Number 12 is Dalton, who is at Refractor Guy 12. He reminded us that you can collect with your heart, but you also want to collect a cool historic team set, and he went after 99 gold Yankees refractors. This 99 Yankees team was obviously in the middle of their dynasty with the Fab Four or the Fab Five, depending who you want to include in there, if Bernie Williams is part of it, right? But this was a quarter-century-old historic gold refractor set. But that team meant so much to him that he decided over the years to try to put that together. There are two separate things here to think about. There's collecting with your heart, and then there is a kind of a cool high-end set, a real difficult chase. You could chase something difficult, but if your heart's not in it, is it really worth it? And you can collect with your heart, but, it's not as much fun to just, put together a bunch of base cards that you can finish off on ComC in 20 minutes, right? So he put this together, and he showed us the best of both worlds. When you put together collecting a team that means a lot to you with a set that means a lot to you. Number 13 is Jeremy Lee of Sports Cards Live. And from Jeremy, I learned that it is never too late to learn and be surprised. Jeremy has been collecting cards for 4 decades. And he was going after this emblem card, this Wayne Gretzky card, and he thought that it was gone. He had tracked it down. He had been chasing it for 12 years or 13 years, and he knew who had it. And he checked in, and the person just did not want to sell it. It was a one of one. And so Jeremy, who's knowledgeable and has been around long enough to know when a cause is lost, thought, that's it. I guess I'm just not going to add that to the entire set that I'm trying to build. And it's the great one. It's Wayne Gretzky, and I'm disappointed, but I guess I'm just going to move on. And then, magically, a different one appeared. And it was a different Gretzky, a different one of one, but from a different team that Gretzky played for. And there it was. And through some creative action, Jeremy was able to locate it. And so here's a guy who has been around and seen almost everything that there is that can happen situationally in this hobby. And something new happened to him and surprised him in a really good way. And he was able to get his card. So no matter how long we are here, we can expect to constantly be able, not constantly, but to often and sometimes see something new and learn something new and not fall into the doldrums of the same thing year after year with nothing ever changing. Number 14 is Dan at Yankee Doodle Dandy Cards. He was the one collecting the Topps Black flagship parallel run of Mariano Rivera. And from what I learned from Dan was to just keep upgrading, to don't settle. Doesn't mean everyone has to do this with their collection, but when he had a PSA 7, he went for a PSA 8. When he had a PSA 8, he went for a PSA 9. He didn't just want to have all the black parallels for the full run of Mariano Rivera. He wanted to have all the highest graded of the parallels. He wanted to have the best of the best of the best. And that's okay. That works for some people, doesn't work for other people. But he knew that this was what he was striving toward. And so sometimes he would have multiple copies. Or he would say, I used to have that one, but now I have this one. Right? Because when people look at his collection, and when he looks at it, more importantly, he knows that there is not a better collection of this card in the world that anybody has. Sitting in his collection is something that nobody else on this planet can boast. And that feels pretty darn good. And number 15 was Tony, who is at TJ is online. And what else can I say about this episode? This was about the 1977 Reggie Jackson proof in the Orioles uniform. I don't want to go much into it again, but this was the card that has fascinated me since I read about it in a magazine in the 1980s. I could have just done this one episode, and I would have felt like my whole podcast experience over the last 2 years would have been fulfilled. The amount of knowledge and understanding that Tony brought to this conversation about the history of this card that almost nobody has seen because it was never actually released, but yet people who have been around, they know that this card exists, but most have never even seen it. He's got one, two, depending how you look at it. Just the understanding and it was like the finishing of a story for me in one way. And I know I'm just trying to keep it about the content and keep it about the listeners and keep it about the guests, but this one was just about Tony and me, and I loved every minute of this, and Tony's willingness to be a teacher in this case and to share with the hobby a lesson about this card that should not be forgotten. And who knows, maybe 10 years from now, 15 years from now, there will be somebody who is a Reggie Jackson collector, and they'll just Google, or they will Claude or some AI, information on the Reggie Jackson proof as they begin their journey into understanding about this card. And they'll find that podcast, and they'll get a crash course in the history of one of the most famous cards that never actually came out. Thank you to all of those listening who have listened to at least one episode of The Chase. I really appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed it. And for those of you who are going to listen, thank you in advance as well. I'd still like to hear back from you. If you listen to one and it resonates, if it hits, if it makes you look at the hobby just a little bit differently, reach out, DM me, tell me how. I always like to hear what works and what doesn't work. So that's it for this episode. I appreciate all of your time. Hopefully the quality of audio isn't too poor on this, but next week we'll be back on my usual setup. So that's it for now. Take care, everyone, and I will talk to you again next time, whenever that may be.